What hygiene was like during the bubonic plague, life in the year 1348. Imagine waking up one morning in the year 1348. The air smells of smoke and something else, something foul, something you cannot name. Your neighbor's door has been sealed shut. A red mark has been painted across the wood. No one enters, no one leaves. And somewhere in the distance, a cart rolls slowly through the cobblestone street, and the driver calls out a phrase that makes your stomach turn. This is not fiction. This is real history. This is what daily life actually looked like when the most devastating epidemic in human history swept through Europe. What hygiene was like during the bubonic plague. Life in the year 1348. The year was 1348, and in the port city of Bristol, England, a merchant named Thomas Coyle stood on the wooden docks, watching a Genoese trading vessel glide into harbour. Thomas was 34 years old, a man of moderate wealth who traded wool and linen. He had a wife named Eleanor, 2 young sons, and a modest stone house near the cathedral. Life was not luxurious, but it was stable. He had no reason to believe that everything he knew was about to be dismantled. The ship carried more than silk and spices. It carried rats, and those rats carried fleas, and those fleas carried something invisible, something no physician of the era could see or name. Within days, the first dock worker fell ill. Within a month, Bristol would begin to collapse from the inside. To understand what cleanliness meant in medieval England, you have to forget everything you know about modern sanitation. There was no running water, no sewers as we know them, no soap in the modern sense, no toothpaste, no deodorant. The average person bathed perhaps once or twice a month. Thomas washed his hands and face each morning using a basin of cold water. He wore the same wool tunic for days or weeks, and when it became too soiled, Eleanor scrubbed it in a barrel of water mixed with lye and wood ash. That was the height of textile care. The streets of Bristol were unpaved in most areas, a mixture of packed dirt, animal waste, and kitchen scraps. Butchers threw offal into the gutters. Chamber pots were emptied from upper windows into the streets below, sometimes with a warning shout, sometimes without. The smell of a medieval city was something that would overwhelm a modern person within seconds. A thick, layered odor of human and animal waste, rotting food, tanning, leather and stagnant water. People simply lived with it. And crucially, no one connected filth with illness. The dominant medical theory was miasma theory. Physicians believed diseases were caused by bad air, poisonous vapors rising from swamps and rotting matter. If the air smelled bad, it was dangerous. If it smelled pleasant, it was safe. So people carried bouquets of flowers, burned incense, held cloves to their noses. They believed with absolute sincerity that a pleasant smell could protect them.
What is it?
Thomas first heard the rumors in late October. A strange illness in the southern ports. People developing swellings in their necks and under their arms. Dark lumps the size of eggs. Fevers that burned so hot, their skin felt like parchment over coals. And then, within days, they were gone. Thomas listened but did not panic. Illness was common. He assumed this was no different. Eleanor was more cautious. She kept the boys inside, scrubbed the floors with vinegar, hung dried rosemary above the doorways. These were the preventive measures available to a 14th century woman. Vinegar, herbs, prayer, and hope. The barber surgeon in Bristol, Hugh Alton, was the closest thing the city had to a medical professional. When the first cases appeared, he prescribed a poultice of mustard and pigeon droppings and recommended bloodletting. His tools were never sterilized. The concept did not exist. He moved from patient to patient, carrying the invisible agent of devastation on his fingers, on his instruments, on his clothing. He was trying to help. He was accelerating the catastrophe. By November, the illness was everywhere. Entire families were found motionless in their beds. Burial grounds filled so quickly that new pits had to be dug outside the walls. And still, no one understood why. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because stories like this one, the real, untold details of history that no one talks about, are shared here every single week, and you do not want to miss what comes next. By December, the situation had deteriorated beyond anything Thomas could have imagined. With so many households struck down, there was no one to collect waste, no one to clear the gutters. Rats thrived in the growing filth. The city was becoming, in the most literal sense, a breeding ground. Thomas's youngest son, William, developed a cough. Eleanor wanted to take him to Hugh the barber surgeon. Thomas refused. He had seen what happened to people who visited Hugh. They went in with one ailment and came out with something far worse. Instead, he treated William at home. Warm broth, rendered fat mixed with ground pepper rubbed on the chest. Every window closed because the belief was that cold air carried the miasma. In reality, the closed room was the wrong environment for a child with a respiratory ailment, but Thomas had no way of knowing that. Eleanor had her own methods. A raw onion beneath William's bed to absorb the illness. A linen, pouch of dried thyme around his neck. Boiled water with bay leaves for him to breathe the steam. Some of these were not entirely without merit, but they were arrived at through superstition rather than science. Water was viewed with deep suspicion, and not without reason. Rivers served as drinking water, waste disposal, and industrial runoff simultaneously. Most people drank ale or weak beer instead, which had been boiled during brewing, and was actually safer, though no one understood why. Bathing was similarly distrusted. Physicians warned that warm water opened the pores, allowing miasma to enter the body. People stopped washing entirely. They believed dirt on the skin served as a protective barrier. At the moment when washing might have reduced transmission, the medical establishment was telling people not to wash. Thomas followed this advice. He stopped bathing. He stopped washing his hands before meals. He believed he was protecting himself. He was doing the opposite. William's cough cleared on its own. But in January of 1349, Eleanor's sister Margaret sent word that her husband Robert had fallen ill. The swellings had appeared. Margaret begged Eleanor to come. Eleanor wanted to go. Thomas forbade it. They argued bitterly in the cold kitchen while the boys slept. Eleanor accused Thomas of cowardice. Thomas accused Eleanor of recklessness. They said things that could not be unsaid, words born not from cruelty, but from terror. Because that is what fear does. It does not make people brave or wise. It makes them desperate, and desperate people hurt the ones closest to them. If this moment is making you feel something, type in the comments right now. Fear changes everything. Eleanor went anyway, slipping out before dawn. She walked through a city that was unrecognizable, doors marked with crosses, the market square nearly deserted. Margaret's house was small and dark. Robert lay on a straw mattress, delirious. Eleanor helped her. Sister for days, changing linens, boiling broth, wiping Robert's face. She did not know that every touch, every moment in that unventilated room was increasing her risk. The fleas were in the bedding, in the straw, in the cracks of the floor. Robert passed 2 days later. Eleanor walked home and told Thomas where she had been. He stared at her in silence, then turned away. 14 days later, Eleanor developed a fever. The fever came slowly at first. Eleanor dismissed it as exhaustion. She continued cooking, cleaning, tending to the boys. But Thomas watched her, the flush in her cheeks that was too bright, the way she gripped the table as if the room was spinning, the tremble in her hands. He knew, but to say it would make it real. On the third morning, she found it, a lump beneath her arm, tender and swollen. The last thread of denial snapped.
All right, easy now, Eleanor.
Thomas carried her to bed and sent the boys to a neighbor named Agnes.
William,
He boiled water. He burned rosemary. He tried a poultice of bread and warm milk on the swelling. He tried cloth soaked in vinegar. He tried smoke of burning juniper. None of it worked. The medical knowledge of 1348 was simply not equipped for what was happening. Physicians operated within humoral theory, 4 essential fluids in the body that needed balance. Too much blood meant bloodletting. Corrupted bile meant purging with laxatives. These treatments actively weakened patients who were already struggling. Thomas did not call the barber surgeon. Instead, he sat beside Eleanor and talked to her. He told her about the first time they met at a wool fair in Gloucester, how she had laughed at his clumsy attempts to impress her. The morning their first son was born, how he stood outside the room, terrified and elated. He talked because talking was the only medicine he had left. Eleanor lingered for 5 days. On the morning of the 6th, she was still. Thomas held her cooling hand for a long time. He was beyond weeping. Grief had consumed everything. He wrapped her in the finest linen he had and carried her to the churchyard himself. Father Aldrich said the words, his voice hoarse, his hands shaking. He had performed more last rites in 3 months than in 20 years of ministry. Thomas walked home through eerily quiet streets. Bristol had already lost 1/3 of its population. Entire streets were deserted. Houses stood empty, doors hanging open. The fabric of daily life was unraveling. He sat in the empty kitchen. The fire had gone out. The house was cold. For the first time in his life, Thomas Coyle had no idea what to do. Spring came to Bristol in 1349, and with it, a fragile hope. The rate of new cases began to slow. Thomas emerged from his house on a morning in late March and stood blinking in pale sunlight. James held his hand. William clung to his leg. They had survived. And Thomas felt something he had not felt in months. Not happiness, not relief, but a quiet determination to continue. The city was transformed. Nearly half its population was gone. There were not enough laborers for the fields, not enough craftsmen for the buildings, not enough priests for the parishes. The old rules no longer applied. Thomas returned to trade. He formed new connections with merchants who had survived, men who understood the weight of what they had endured without needing to say it. 2 years later, he remarried, a widow named Catherine, who had lost her husband and daughter. Their marriage was practical at first, 2 broken people needing companionship. But something grew between them, forged in shared suffering and mutual respect. Catherine brought a meticulous attention to cleanliness. She insisted on boiling all drinking water. She washed linens weekly. She swept floors daily, scattered fresh rushes with lavender and mint. She kept kitchen scraps covered and hauled away regularly. Not because she understood bacteria, but because she had watched her daughter fade in a filthy room and vowed to never live in filth again. Thomas adopted her standards without question. He could not articulate what he had learned in scientific terms, but he felt it, a conviction that the conditions in which people lived affected whether they lived at all. This quiet revolution was happening across Europe. Ordinary people, shaped by extraordinary loss, making individual choices to live differently. Cities began implementing sanitation measures. London passed ordinances requiring butchers to dispose of offal outside the walls. Bristol appointed inspectors to monitor street cleanliness, primitive and inconsistent, but representing a fundamental shift, the first understanding that filth and illness were connected. Thomas never knew the word bacteria. He never understood why Eleanor fell ill. He never grasped the connection between rats and the swellings. But he understood something that transcended science, that the way people live matters profoundly. The water they drink, the air they breathe, the care they take with their homes, it is a matter of life itself. James grew strong and inherited his father's business. William became a clerk who kept records of the city's trade. Both carried the mark of their childhood, a wariness around crowds, a habit of washing hands before meals, a respect for the fragility of life. Thomas passed at 58 in his sleep, in the same stone house where he had lived with Eleanor. Catherine was beside him. The fire was burning. The house was clean. Every time you turn on a faucet and clean water flows, every time you wash your hands with soap, every time you walk down a paved street, you are standing on the shoulders of people like Thomas and Eleanor and Catherine, people who suffered so that centuries later we could live differently. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who loves history, because understanding where we came from is how we appreciate where we are. If you watched all the way to this point, it is because this story moved you. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can meet you and know who truly appreciates the stories on this channel. Make sure you are subscribed. Every week we bring history to life in ways you will not find anywhere else. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and I will see you in the next one.